when your luxury SUV sank into my strategically dug trench. Vanessa's face turned into a mask of outrage that made every minute of my 30 years taking care of this road worth it. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. I've lived on the same family ranch since I was born, up in the beautiful hills of Oregon. I inherited this property from my father 30 years ago, and ever since, I've been diligently maintaining our private gravel road that winds for 2 kilometers to the main road. It's hard work, constant leveling, replenishing gravel, and controlling erosion after heavy rains. But I've always been proud to keep my father's legacy alive. Everything was in perfect harmony until the luxury subdivision Mountain View Estates started being built on the neighboring land 2 years ago. I wasn't bothered at first. I grew up seeing small towns expand, and I knew it was only a matter of time before development reached our hills. The problem started 3 months after the first residents moved in. I noticed an increase in traffic on my private road. At first, I thought they were just curious folks taking a drive. Then I noticed the pattern. A sleek white electric SUV would pass through my property every morning at 7:45 and return around 6:30 in the evening. I set up a discreet camera near the entrance and discovered the driver. Vanessa Harrington, 42, the newly elected president of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association. She was using my road as a shortcut to the downtown area, saving about 8 minutes on her daily trip, but wrecking all my hard work in the process. I started with simple measures. I put up private property, no trespassing signs at both ends of the road. Vanessa completely ignored them. The next week, I put up a larger sign explaining that the road was maintained solely by me, with no public funding, and that unauthorized use was causing damage that I would have to repair on my own. The next morning, I found that sign broken on the ground. I decided it was time for a direct approach. I attended the monthly HOA meeting, introduced myself politely, and explained the situation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the owner of the neighboring ranch. I'm here to talk about the unauthorized use of my private road. Vanessa interrupted before I could continue. Oh, you must be the owner of the old road. Great that you're here. We're just discussing how your trail would be a lot more useful if it were properly paved and integrated into our road system. Sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not offering my road for public use. It runs through my private property, and I'm here because several people, including you, have been using it without permission. Vanessa smiled condescendingly. Well, technically, if a road is used regularly by the public for more than 5 years, it can be considered an easement by prescription. And from what I've looked into, that road has been there for decades. It's been there for decades on my private property, maintained solely by my family. Let's take a vote, she announced, completely ignoring my objection. Everyone in favor of starting the process to declare the ranch road a public easement, raise your hand. I left that meeting boiling with anger, not just because of her arrogance, but because of the complete lack of respect for property rights that my family had honored for generations. The last straw came after a particularly strong storm. The water had formed small channels on the road, something I would normally fix in a day's work. However, Vanessa and other residents kept using the road in those conditions, turning the small channels into deep ravines that would require weeks of work and tons of new gravel. That was when my old friend Jonathan came to visit me. At 55, he was a retired civil engineer who had worked on various infrastructure projects in the county. You know what you need? Jonathan said after hearing my story. A rainwater conservation project, strategically placed. That night, Jonathan and I came up with the perfect plan. Being a former civil engineer, he knew exactly which environmental regulations allowed rural property owners to implement erosion control measures without special permits. It's totally legal, Jonathan explained while drawing up the plans on my kitchen counter. Rural property owners have the right to install drainage systems to protect their land from erosion. We're going to position a catch basin right where the road makes that gentle curve, the point where drivers pick up speed. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. We'd dig a trench 2 meters wide and 1 meter deep, cutting across the entire road. We'd install a drainage pipe at the bottom, covered with coarse gravel. To any inspector, it would look like a genuine erosion control structure, which technically it was. Just don't fill the trench with surface gravel for now, Jonathan said with a smile. It'll be perfectly visible to anyone driving at moderate speed on private property. But for someone speeding, we spent the weekend working on it. We rented a mini excavator, installed the drainage pipe according to the county's standard specifications, and even set up small marking posts with orange warning tape on either side of the trench. I also installed a new camera pointed directly at the drainage work, just for documentation purposes, of course. On Monday, I woke up earlier than usual. I made a cup of coffee and sat on the porch overlooking the road. At 7:43, I saw Vanessa's white SUV entering my property. Sure enough, she was driving well above the safe speed for a rural gravel road. The distance and the overgrown brush made it hard for her to see the trench until the very last moment. When she finally spotted the warning posts, it was already too late. I saw the luxury SUV partially vanish into the hole with a satisfying thud. The vehicle hit hard enough to deploy its airbags. I set my coffee on the table and walked calmly over to the scene. By the time I arrived, Vanessa was on the phone, screaming that she had been deliberately attacked and demanding immediate assistance. Her $80,000 electric SUV was partially embedded in the trench, with visible damage to the front end. She hung up as soon as she saw me. "You did this on purpose," she shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. What did I do? Install a perfectly legal drainage system on my private property, clearly marked with safety posts, I said, pointing to the orange markers. By the way, you're trespassing on my property. Again. Sheriff Robert arrived 40 minutes later. At 61, he knew the area and its history well. While a tow truck was on its way to remove the vehicle, Robert examined the scene. "Vanessa claims you deliberately set a trap," the sheriff commented while looking at the trench. "It's an erosion control project, Sheriff," I responded, showing him Jonathan's technical drawings. "It's completely within county regulations. Notice the safety markings and proper drainage pipe installation. And more importantly, it's entirely on my private property." The sheriff reviewed the documents and the private property signs I'd installed. "Well, Ms. Harrington, he's right. This is private property. The warning signs are clearly visible, and the project seems legitimate. I don't see any law being broken here." Vanessa turned beet red with outrage. "This isn't over," she threatened as her vehicle was towed out of the trench. The damage was considerable: a dented bumper, a punctured radiator, and something definitely wrong with the electrical system, judging by the erratically flashing dashboard lights. I thought this incident would put an end to the problem. I was wrong. Instead of backing down, Vanessa dramatically escalated the situation in the days that followed. First, an official letter from the HOA arrived, declaring that I had violated the community standards and had to pay a fine of $3,000 for interfering with the neighborhood's road infrastructure. I laughed when I read that the HOA had absolutely no jurisdiction over my property. 2 days later, I found a post on a local blog titled "Reclusive Farmer Sabotages Community Access." The article featured an unflattering photo of my trench and quoted Vanessa calling me a relic from a bygone era trying to stand in the way of community progress. There was no mention that the road was private property. The following week, a man in an ill-fitting suit showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Kevin Harrington, a lawyer specializing in real estate law. He handed me a legal intimidation notice threatening lawsuits for damages, emotional distress, and malicious interference with a right-of-way. "Are you related to Vanessa?" I asked, noticing the resemblance and the same last name. "I'm an associate," he replied evasively, "and I suggest you take this notice very seriously." The situation was spiraling. I decided that I needed to find a definite legal advantage. If Vanessa wanted to play dirty, I had to be absolutely sure that my position was protected. That's when I spent 3 days at the county recorder's office, digging through dusty documents and examining property records. The oldest clerk, Martha, 73, became my ally in this search. "What exactly are you looking for?" Martha asked on the second day. "Anything about right-of-way, easements, or access related to my property and the adjacent land now occupied by Mountain View Estates." Martha thought for a moment. There was a big lawsuit about water rights in that area back in the 70s. There might be some related documentation about access, too. That tip was golden. Among the records of the water rights dispute, I found a 1978 document that was absolutely crucial. When the property that now housed Mountain View Estates was first subdivided, a legal agreement was established stating that when the Lot 35B is developed in the future, it must include the construction of its own exclusive access road, as indicated in Exhibit C, and it is expressly forbidden to use, requisition, or request any right-of-way through adjacent properties, particularly the private road maintained by the Anderson family, which must remain for the exclusive use of the Anderson Ranch owners in perpetuity. My heart raced as I read that passage. It was the perfect document, specific, legally binding, and, most importantly, recorded with the property deed. This meant that the developers of Mountain View Estates were legally obligated to build their own access road and were expressly prohibited from using mine. I made certified copies of all the relevant documents and scheduled a consultation with Alexandra Pritchard, a 63-year-old lawyer specialized in real estate law and rural disputes. "This is pure gold," Alexandra declared after reviewing the documents. "Not only do you have the basic property rights on your side, but this specific agreement completely nullifies any claim of implied easement that Vanessa might try to make. In fact, we have grounds for a substantial countersuit." "Counter lawsuit?" I asked. "For trespassing, damage to your road, disturbing your peace, and, depending on who wrote that local blog post, possible defamation. And if that so-called lawyer Kevin isn't actually licensed to practice law in Oregon, which we strongly suspect, we also have a case for fraudulent legal representation." Alexandra prepared a detailed lawsuit against Vanessa personally and against the Mountain View Estates HOA. We included photographic evidence of the road damage, copies of the destroyed private property signs, recordings of my attempts to resolve the situation peacefully, and the crucial 1978 document specifying that the subdivision had to build its own road. To complete our case, Alexandra hired a private investigator who confirmed our suspicions. Kevin Harrington was not a lawyer. He was Vanessa's cousin and had only attended law school for one semester before dropping out. Posing as a lawyer and handing over fake legal documents was a serious crime. Vanessa, as we expected, filed a counteraction, claiming physical and emotional distress caused by the trap on the road. Her cousin Kevin tried to represent her, a catastrophic error that Alexandra was more than happy to anticipate. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. The county courthouse was more crowded than usual, apparently. Our little property dispute had become the most talked about issue in the region. I noticed several residents from Mountain View Estates, some looking at me with disdain and others seeming uncomfortable with the whole situation. Judge Malcolm Reeves, known for his impartiality and little tolerance for legal frivolity, presided over the case. At 68, Judge Reeves was renowned for valuing tradition and property rights, but also for being scrupulously fair in his application of the law. Before we begin, Judge Reeves announced after the initial formalities, "I would like to clarify that Mr. Kevin Harrington is not authorized to represent the defendant in this court. According to verification from the Oregon Bar Association, he is not licensed to practice law in this state." Kevin visibly paled. Vanessa shot him a withering look before murmuring something to the real lawyer she'd hastily retained, a young woman who looked like she had just graduated from college. Alexandra began our presentation with quiet authority, showing maps, photos of my damaged road, and finally, the 1978 document. "Your Honor, this legal agreement, duly recorded and attached to the property deed, explicitly states that the development now known as Mountain View Estates must construct its own access road and is expressly prohibited from using my client's private road. There is no ambiguity here." Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that the document was outdated and that modern realities required a more flexible interpretation of access. "Counselor," Judge Reeves interrupted, "I'm curious as to when exactly the law protecting private property became outdated? This document is clearly in effect, has never been legally challenged, and is attached to the property deed." The morning proceeded with Vanessa trying to portray herself as the victim, claiming that my trench was a malicious trap designed to cause harm. Alexandra quickly presented the county-approved drainage plans, photos of the orange marking posts, and even a written statement from Sheriff Robert confirming that everything was within legal standards. Furthermore, added Alexandra, my client clearly marked both ends of the road as private property. Ms. Harrington deliberately ignored these warnings for months, refused to cease the unauthorized use even after direct requests, and even orchestrated a campaign of harassment against my client. The critical moment came when Alexandra called Martha, the veteran records clerk, to the stand. Mrs. Martha, in your 46 years working at the county records, have you ever seen a case where an access agreement as specific as this was nullified simply because one party decided to ignore it? Never, Martha replied firmly. These agreements are the backbone of property rights in our county. If they could be disregarded for convenience, we'd have chaos in our rural communities. During the lunch break, Alexandra looked confident. We're doing very well. Judge Reeves clearly understands the importance of the 1978 document. And what about the claim that I deliberately set a trap? I asked. Alexandra smiled. That's why I saved our surprise witness for this afternoon. After the break, Alexandra called Jonathan to the stand. With his 3 decades of experience as a civil engineer, he detailed exactly how our drainage project followed the county's standard erosion control protocols for rural roads. In fact, Jonathan continued, given the damage caused by the unauthorized traffic, this type of drainage structure was not only appropriate but necessary to preserve the integrity of the road and prevent further erosion that could affect the local streams. Jonathan's technical and confident testimony clearly impressed Judge Reeves. But the final blow came when Alexandra played the recording from my camera showing Vanessa repeatedly ignoring the private property signs over several weeks, speeding on my road well above safe limits, and finally, on the day of the incident, careening right past the orange marking posts before falling into the trench. The courtroom fell silent as the recording ended. Vanessa's lawyer tried to question the legality of the footage, but Judge Reeves pointed out that cameras on private property are perfectly legal in Oregon. After 3 days of trial, Judge Reeves was ready to give his ruling. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Vanessa before beginning. This court values both property rights and common sense. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that Mr. Anderson is the rightful owner of the road in question, that it was properly marked as private property, and that he implemented a perfectly legal and well-marked erosion control measure. The 1978 document leaves no doubt regarding the access rights, explicitly prohibiting use of the road by future developments. He continued, therefore, I order that Ms. Harrington and the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association immediately cease any use of Mr. Anderson's private road. Furthermore, the HOA must begin construction of its own access road, as specified in the original agreement within 90 days. There was then a dramatic pause as Judge Reeves flipped through his notes. As for the damages, the Homeowners Association shall pay Mr. Anderson $32,500 for road repairs, plus $15,000 for continued trespassing. Ms. Harrington shall personally pay $10,000 for harassment and attempted defamation. All legal costs shall be borne by the defendants. The judge then turned directly to Kevin. As for Mr. Kevin Harrington, this court is forwarding your case to the county prosecutor for possible criminal charges for practicing law illegally. I strongly suggest you get yourself a real lawyer, this time for real. It was an absolute victory. As we left the courthouse, I received pats on the back from local farmers and even from some Mountain View Estates residents who looked relieved to be free from Vanessa's leadership. Alexandra smiled as she packed up her documents. You know she's probably going to be removed as HOA president after this, right? That would be a shame, I replied with a discreet smile. The fallout from the trial was swift and transformative. At an emergency meeting called the following week, the Mountain View Estates homeowners nearly unanimously voted to remove Vanessa from her presidency. The internal regulations were amended to explicitly prohibit her from holding any leadership position for the next 15 years. The HOA issued a formal apology in its monthly newsletter, acknowledging that improper actions were taken with regard to the neighboring property, and that the association is committed to being a good neighbor and respecting the property rights of all area residents. As ordered by the court, within 90 days a construction company began work on the new access road for the subdivision, exactly where the original 1978 plan had designated. During the construction, I occasionally saw Vanessa watching the work from afar, her face a mixture of defeat and resentment. Things got even worse for her when someone, I strongly suspect one of the subdivision residents, posted the video of her SUV falling into the trench. The recording went viral quickly, titled "Karen of the HOA Learns a Lesson About Private Property." In just a few days, the video had over 2 million views. Kevin, her cousin, eventually reached a settlement with the prosecutor, community service, and a hefty fine in exchange for avoiding jail. According to Martha, who knows all the local gossip, he now works at a building supply store in Portland and avoids any conversation about law. And my trench? I decided to make it permanent. With the compensation received, I hired Jonathan, who had finally retired for good and was looking for a quiet place to live, to redesign the space. We transformed the trench into a small ornamental pond, with stones carefully arranged around it and a water circulation system that creates a pleasant brook-like sound. I stocked the pond with colorful koi carp and installed subtle lighting that makes it particularly beautiful at dusk. A small plaque on the edge simply says, "Vanessa's Pond, established 2023. Maybe it's a bit petty, but it puts a smile on my face every morning. Over time, Jonathan ended up moving into a renovated cabin at the north end of my property. With an experienced engineer around, my road has never been in better shape, now properly leveled, with a complete drainage system and top-quality gravel. In the late afternoons, we often sit together on the porch, enjoying the mountain views and the reclaimed peace. As for Vanessa, 3 months after the trial, she put her house up for sale. The real estate market had cooled, and her reputation as that woman from the trench video didn't help the price. She ended up selling at a significant loss and, according to reports that reached me, moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. 2 weeks ago, I received an unexpected postcard with no return address. The image showed a generic desert landscape from Arizona, and on the back, a single handwritten line, "I still think you overdid it." I recognized the handwriting from our multiple legal encounters. I smiled, framed the card, and hung it next to my window with a view of the pond. Sometimes, when I see the new residents of Mountain View Estates driving on their own paved road, I give a friendly wave. Many wave back. Some even stop to admire Vanessa's pond and hear the full story. A young couple even invited me to the subdivision's annual barbecue, an offer I gladly accepted. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Maybe, in the end, Vanessa did manage to bring the community together, just not in the way she intended. And as for my private road, it's still exactly that. Private, well-maintained, and free of unwanted visitors. Just the way my father would have wanted.